Today we would like to ask some questions concerning Security Council reform. And first, the question is, what is the basic stance? How do you recognize the importance of the Security Council reform on behalf of your group for consensus?
I think that the reform of the Security Council is one of the main issues at the United Nations. And this is for the credibility of the United Nations as organization and the credibility of the member states. We need to reform Security Council to make more effective, more efficient. Our group, Italy and its partner, believe that compromise and consensus are the key words for a true reform of Security Council. We believe that every member state of the United Nations must find an ownership in the new reform. We also believe that as long as some member states continue to try to impose a solution over others, we will never have a Security Council reform.
And so in that context, what kind of compromise is necessary to move forward this Security Council reform?
Italy and its partner, the Uniting for Consensus group, is the only group among the negotiating groups in the United Nations which presented the new formulas and new propositions. We believe that there are some principles on which we have to be guided in the Reform Security Council. And the first one is the accountability. And this is extremely important because it makes responsible each member state who will serve in the Security Council, and will make responsible every member state who will vote for the different countries competing to be in the Security Council. Our proposition is what is called the intermediate position, which was meant in order to come forward and induce other groups to discuss and to negotiate. We believe that longer-term seats may be the solution for a concrete reform Security Council, and as long as this accountability, meaning that the General Assembly votes regularly for new members in the Security Council, that we are ready to discuss, for instance, the terms of the duration of the terms of the longer seats and the possible re-election on those seats.
So do you mean that the longer-term seats are non-permanent members or permanent members?
No, they are non-permanent members. You know that United for Consensus is against the principle of expanding the Security Council to new permanent members, because this will make the Security Council not manageable in the future. Because another principle which has to be included in the Reform Security Council is the flexibility. We are experiencing now, since more than 15 years, that we are discussing about the Reform Security Council, how difficult it is to change the Security Council. If we add new permanent members, it will be impossible in 5, 10, 15 years to reform it again if many other countries will come and we wanted to assume more responsibilities. So our formula will make the Security Council flexible, adaptable to any circumstances that international relations in 10, 15, 20 years will provide to us.
In that opinion, some people say that Italy is opposed to Germany becoming permanent members, and South Korea, Japan, Argentina, Brazil. It is true that there are those kinds of opinions. What's your idea about those kinds of opinions?
Well, Italy has been engaged from the very beginning in this reform because, as I said, we consider a very, very important issue for United Nations today, but also for its future. We do not oppose countries. We are not against the aspirations of individual countries. I have the highest consideration for national interest. But in the Reform Security Council, we must consider the interest of everybody. We cannot have a reform of the Council against countries. This is not conceivable in an organization like United Nations. And that's why, as I said, compromise and consensus are the key words in order to really have a true, concrete negotiation for Security Council reform.
So could you explain precisely what number of seats is necessary for reform of Security Council? So on behalf of the Group for Consensus, what is the latest idea? What is the latest proposal?
As I said, I think that the first thing that we have to do is to start negotiating on principles. Basically, we never did. I have to be honest with you, although I know that I'm addressing to Japanese public opinion. The G4 always, since the beginning, believed that they have the right to sit as new permanent members. And once again, I wanted to underline, I don't have anything against national interests and their protection. The point is that after 15 years, that the G4, meaning Japan, India, Germany, and Brazil, are trying to impose their own vision of the Security Council unsuccessfully, I think the time has come to come and discussing about principle. As you know, in the last 4 months, the G4 took a very strong and aggressive initiative in order to have the adoption of a resolution increasing the Security Council in both categories, non-permanent and permanent. And this was a violation of the resolution which was adopted 3 years ago by the membership, by consensus. And that resolution was the one which launched the intergovernmental negotiations with a package of issues, including veto. The resolution that the G4 presented to the membership was very ambiguous, especially on veto, because they want to try to gain the support of African group without losing the traditional support of G4. Most of them are against the veto. The aggressive behavior, this confrontational attitude, gave a boost to the Italy and its partners' position. Because, we had the conference in Rome on Security Council reform in May, which was attended by 123 member states, which is almost 70% of the membership, while the resolution presented by the G4 till now gained only 30% of support. And we convened in Rome in order to revamp the interest for the Security Council reform on new basis: compromise, consensus, dialogue.
And so, okay, and so as you just, so if the draft resolution from G4 is put on the table, so can your group vote for it, or you can't? What's your idea about it?
As I said, we are against a reform which will include new permanent members. We already have a lot of problems with the 5 permanents in terms of reform Security Council. We don't have to add more new permanent members. And then they said, if you add another 5 or 6 permanent members, you will plaster the Security Council forever. You will never have the possibility to change it anymore. We have been seeing in the last 20 years that the world has changed dramatically fast. We know that the world will change even faster in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And which kind of reform we could do in 10, 15 years if we will have 10 or 12 permanent members? It will be simply impossible. We must have the duty, even in front of history, to have a reform which will make the Security Council so flexible in order to be adaptable without a new reform.
So let me double check. So could you specify the good aspects and the bad aspects of G4 proposal?
Well, the bad aspect, which is the only one, in fact, because the only point which characterizes the proposition of G4 is to have new permanent members. And of course, they think about themselves as new permanent members, while you know that the organization is composed by 192 member states. Basically, as I said, we believe that new permanent members will not make the Security Council work more efficiently, and will not make the possibility for new countries which will emerge in the next 5, 10, 15 years to assume more responsibility. Our proposition is the one which will give to any member state the possibility to serve within the Security Council, to assume more responsibilities, with the accountability, meaning that we have to look for the consensus of the General Assembly. We will have to look for the vote of our peers, which will recognize us the reason to be member of the Security Council, non-permanent member of the Security Council. That's why our proposition to have a longer seat, but subject to election. This is the most important principle, the accountability.
So do you think G4 proposal is to self-interest or not? What's your idea?
Well, I have to be honest with you. It is only meant for the 4 countries which are proposing. Italy and its partners, we believe that to have an organization which will work properly, we must think about everybody. And then everybody will assume different responsibility according to the responsibility which a country wants to take it. But you must be recognized as such by your fellow member states. And the election is the only and most democratic way to have the honor to serve in the Security Council.
So this year, did your group and the G4 group make some negotiations about it? And what's your perspective of the possibility of the negotiation between 2 groups?
We have been always open, not only with the G4, but with all the member states, all the stakeholders of the negotiations. I repeatedly said during the different informal meetings that we had at the General Assembly that the Uniting for Consensus group is ready to negotiate, to discuss with everybody who is willing to do it. We don't have particularly preconditions on that. We always said that we have to discuss on principles and to have a reform which is a compromise. In fact, if you think about it, at United Nations we compromise on everything. I mean, this is our job. And it's very strange, to be honest, that only on the Security Council reform this is not possible. And I have to be honest once again, we believe that this has not been possible because of the attitude of the G4. Because what they've been pursuing for 15 years is a permanent seat for themselves. And this is not acceptable in such an organization as United Nations.
And so you show me your precise analysis about the possibility of the adoption of G4 proposal. So to put it frankly, so do you think it is possible that General Assembly of this session can adopt the resolution proposed by G4 countries?
I can make an easy forecast that will be impossible. The fierce opposition that the proposition of the G4 could have in the General Assembly and the Conference Rome, where the approach was exactly, as I said, the compromise and the consensus, and the fact that the African Union will reconfirm their own position is giving a clear perception that such approval is impossible. Some of the G4, including Japan, has already realized that. And that's why Italy is ready to engage in negotiations and discussions, concrete and fair negotiations with Japan. Because, you know, we are two countries very similar in many respects. We are both very committed and very engaged in multilateralism. And I believe that if we really start a discussion on the principle on which I'm sure we can agree upon, we can give a huge contribution for the new reform of Security Council for the benefit of the United Nations.
Okay, so last question is that, especially in what point do you think a group for consensus and the African Union group can go together?
Our proposition is also very clear for African group. We believe that Africans should be more represented in the Security Council. You know, most of the international crises are in Africa. Most of the peacekeeping operations are in Africa. United Nations are working very much with the African Union. European Union is working very closely with the European Union in the most important crisis in Africa. So we strongly believe that Africa must have a important place in the Security Council. Our proposition provides this place for African countries. When they will be ready to discuss with us, we are already ready.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.